Hello, class. Today I'm going to talk about Andy Warhol's shooting. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the pop art movement. Pop art is a art movement that emerged in the mid 20th century, primarily in the United States and the United Kingdom, as a reaction against the conventions of traditional fine art. It sought to blur the boundaries between high art and popular culture by incorporating imagery from mass media, advertisement, comic books, and everyday consumer goods. Artists such as Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, and Claes Oldenburg became iconic figures of this movement, known for their vibrant, bold colors and innovative techniques. Warhol's Campbell soup cans and Lichtenstein's comic strips inspired paintings are quintessential examples of pop art's playful yet critical examination of consumerism and mass production. By elevating mundane objects and commercial imagery to the status of fine art, pop art challenged perceptions and invited audiences to reconsider the relationship between art, culture, and society. One of the most influential figures in the art world is Andy Warhol, who significantly contributed to the development of the pop art genre. Born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Slovakian parents, Warhol's interests manifested at a young age, and his artistic abilities were evident throughout high school. In 1949, his passion for art led him to New York City, where he successfully integrated into the most exclusive social circles of the art and entertainment industry. Warhol employed various techniques, including painting, silk print, sculpture, and film, to explore consumerism, culture, capitalism, and celebrity culture. Notably, he pioneered the use of mass production and consumerism in the realm of fine art, with the most renowned works featuring Marilyn Monroe and the Campbell's soup. Upon moving to New York City, Warhol began working with different magazines such as Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. Here, his illustrations and paintings began to gain much attention. By the 1960s, Warhol reached his artistic peak with the production of his Campbell Soup series, as well as the inauguration of an artistic space which Warhol named The Factory. The Factory, a place which was entirely wrapped in silver, intended to be a safe space for those with artistic abilities. It was used as an art studio and underground club for people with eccentric personalities. According to Warhol, the silver represented the future and the past. It was also close connection to the type of art and deviant behavior used amongst the people who were involved with the factory. This was cited by Arthur C. Danto. Andy Warhol became the epicenter of New York City nightlife. Celebrities and upcoming artists all wanted to become part of his inner circle, the most infamous of them being Dorothy Podbert and Valerie Solanas. Dorothy Podbert was a performing artist who gained notoriety in 1964 after attending one of Warhol's expositions and shooting one of Warhol's Marilyn Monroe silkscreen paintings. These paintings would later become some of Warhol's most expensive works, selling at Christie's for over $190 million. As Dorothy Podbert became persona non grata at the factory, Warhol became aware of the potential of his art becoming transformed by third-party aggressions, adding value and significance to his work. Ultimately, deciding to display these paintings as the shot Marilyn's and reclaiming his work. On the other hand, the most controversial amongst the two was Valerie Solanas, a psychologist from New Jersey who envisioned becoming a famous playwright and creating her own radical feminist movement. She was the author of the Scum Manifesto. In her manifesto, Solanas shared radical feminist positions, arguing that men were the weakest sex and genetically defective, specifically lacking a chromosome, and therefore calling for their extermination. Her early childhood was marked by trauma. She was a victim of sexual abuse coming from both her father and grandfather. This would ultimately affect her hatred for men later on. She reached out and met Andy Warhol in 1967 with the intention of selling him a film script for a production by the name of Up Your Ass. After reviewing the script, Andy Warhol was not interested in its vulgar language and ultimately displaced Solana's script. Intoxicated by rage and psychotic belief that Warhol was gonna steal her work without giving her credit, she became determined to punish Warhol. On June 3rd, 1968, Solanas waited for Andy Warhol at the factory's new location. They both took the elevator towards the office. Upon arriving, and as Andy Warhol was walking along the new space, Solanas took out a gun and began shooting Andy Warhol. Several rounds were fired. Before fleeing the scene, Solanas leans down and puts her gun in between Warhol's armpit and fires again. She ultimately flees the scene and gives herself in, with her first words after the arrest being, "He controls my life," and "Read my manifesto. It will tell you what I am." Andy Warhol ultimately survived the attempted murder, but he was left with irreparable damage to his organs and mental health. After pleading guilty to attempted murder, she served 3 years at the Women's State Prison in Bedford Hills, New York. Despite gaining notoriety due to the attack on Warhol, Solanas' creative writings and plays were greatly concealed from the public. According to Dana Heller, a professor of feminist studies from Eastern Michigan University, it was Mary Herron who was responsible of conducting investigative research to uncover and rediscover Solanas' writings, ultimately inspiring her to produce the 1997 movie I Shot Andy Warhol. Herron's movie became controversial to many art critics and former members of the factory, such as Lou Reed, who did not agree with creating a movie about Warhol's shooter. Other references in pop culture regarding Warhol's shooting were also used in Ryan Murphy's American Horror Story, The Cult Season. As previously mentioned, the aftermath of the attack left physical and mental damage on Warhol. However, it also transformed his production methods as well as his own perception of self in art, to the extent of considering his own body being a product and consequence of his art. In his book, Between Images, Ryan Conrad quotes art critic Annette Michelson with, "The shot from Valerie Solanas' gun in 1968 marks the boundary between two sides and modes of production. The moment when a systematic division of labor replaces a previous artisanal mode of production." It was evident that Andy Warhol's work was later scrutinized by art critics from the lens of a victim. However, as an artist, it was not the role he sought for himself. Looking in the mirror and seeing all the scars, it's scary. I close my eyes, but it doesn't look that bad. The scars are really very beautiful. They look pretty in a funny way. Also, quoted by Conrad, Valerie Solanas as a feminist icon. So, for most people, the use of violence is never acceptable, and therefore, any contribution to the feminist theory made by Solanas is obscured by her actions. However, there are those who see the Scum Manifesto as one of the most relevant feminist contributions to the 20th century. Even her lawyer, who was part of the NOW, which means National Organization for Women, referred to her as one of the most important spokesperson for the feminist movement. In her document, Solanas argues that we live in a patriarchal society dominated by men who intentionally oppress and exploit women. She argues that men oppress women in order to hide their biological inferiority, and that the only way of fixing the issue is by overturning all existing structures that have been established throughout the patriarchy. As mentioned in her book, Brienne Fams states, as readers delve into the Scum Manifesto, it is evident to see how Solanas broke rules, norms, barriers, and academic modalities. Fans recognizes Solanas as a talented writer, one who was victim of trauma and isolation. Okay, going back to scum. The word scum refers to society for cutting men, a phrase that was not used throughout the manifesto. However, it was proclaimed to go along with the ideological philosophy of the text. Throughout her manifesto, Solanas puts out her definition of scum woman. Contrary to Daddy's Girl, the scum woman does not comply with the expectations imposed by society. She is above the basic needs of being seduced by a male figure and will not engage in the domestication of her own self. On the other hand, Daddy's Girls refers to those women who are domesticated and indoctrinated by the patriarchy, influenced by their relationship to their fathers. These women are complicit of a male-dominated world and are okay to being subject to it. Under Solanas' political and philosophical ideology, much focus is placed on sex instead of gender. Here, her perspective chooses to align with a binary vision of gender, where only men and women exist, and those who do not fall under those two categories are sexually deviant. For Valerie Solanas, radical feminism should not include trans women. She argues that trans women are a result of men transgressing women's spaces. According to this perspective, the activism element delves further away from the contemporary concept of liberal feminism and chooses to silence the struggle of marginalized people. It fails to recognize the victimization of other individuals by the patriarchal social structures. Therefore, one can argue that Valerie's radical feminism is short-sighted and more of an individual rant against society rather than a larger social movement that represents marginalized individuals and equal opportunities for all. Finally, despite much controversy over Andy Warhol's shooting and Solanas' contribution to the feminist movement, it is impossible to dissociate Valerie Solanas from Andy Warhol and vice versa. They are both recognized as iconic figures that have been immortalized throughout art and film. For Solanas, her dream of publishing her manifesto came true. As stated in her letters to Warhol written while she was serving time in prison, she believed that by publishing her manifesto she had gained independence from all the men that exploited her. On the other hand, for Warhol, the incident with Valerie Solanas permeated his artistic work before and after his death. Warhol survived the shooting, however, died 20 years after the incident due to complications that were left by the incident. To conclude this presentation regarding Andy Warhol's shooting, I would like to say, if Solana's objective was to gain independence from the men in her life, she failed. Her legacy will always be tied to being the one who tried to kill Andy Warhol. As an activist, she also failed because her short-sightedness and transphobia lead her feminist movement to be considered inadequate, and obsolete.